Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Big updates today on the major upgrades Ferrari have planned over the coming races. They believe they can genuinely catch Red Bull in the relatively near future. They are changing major elements of their car over the coming couple of races with top speed, one of the key components. Also big updates on what's going on with Andretti, especially with the Alpine sale back on the menu. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. We're going to start pretty much at the back of the grid today and work our way forward. Let's talk Williams. They have had already $2 million of crash damage and repair costs this year. It's one of the issues. You bring in a rookie, sure, you expect some crashes. Last year wasn't great for Sargent. I'm pretty sure he won the World Destructors Championship last season because people tally up how much crash damage there has been. Albon's crash, though, in Australia was a big deal. He crashed again in, obviously, Suzuka, but that wasn't necessarily his fault. And then Sargent in the wall that race again and nearly put it in the wall at the second Degner, of course, but he did manage to save that one. But the issue is mainly for Williams is that the two worst races to have crashes at are Australia and Suzuka, pretty much, because you've got to send the chassis all the way back to the UK to get it fixed, and then all the way back to Suzuka, and then all the way back to the UK, and then all the way back to China, right? So, you know, the costs that ramp up there quite considerably, transportation, these other factors are definitely affecting Williams right now in terms of development of their car. If all they can focus on is fixing the car and fixing the chassis, then they can't do much in terms of development. We know that Williams, their intention is not necessarily to win the World Championship next year or the year after. It's really planning for 2026 and beyond to be in a more competitive spot. So they will make sacrifices in the short term, but this is not helping anybody apart from their competitors. RB though, Yuki Tsunoda had a great race this past weekend, scored a point, and man, how about Marco? I know that Marco likes Yuki, and we know this, but I don't think I've ever seen Marco go on quite as consistent a tirade on why Tsunoda is doing such a great job right now. He gassed him up to no ends the last race in Australia, and he's done the same thing here again after Japan, saying that this weekend he was at the level of Max and Alonso and the other top drivers on the grid. So that is quite some praise. I don't think that Christian Horner wants to put Yuki in the seat at Red Bull, but I think that Marco wouldn't be opposed to the idea, just based on how much he talks about Yuki and how much he seems to like him and how much of a solid driver that he has seemingly become, and talking about, well, his maturity is now there. He doesn't make the mistakes that he has previously. And maybe you look at Bahrain post-race and you think differently, and Mexico last year wasn't great either. So we'll see if Yuki can keep this up. Hopefully he can, but Red Bull have to find a second driver, and maybe Marco is saying to Christian, like, look, maybe Yuki isn't the worst idea in the world, or maybe Christian Horner and Helmut Marko aren't really talking anymore, because the rumour has it that some degree of a power struggle behind the scenes over there. It's funny, really, as we work our way forward on the grid, we find Mercedes rather a far way down, and even this weekend, Toto Wolff confirmed they were again running experiments on Hamilton's car, which is, you know, we know that they mentioned it as like a live testing weekend or whatever to understand the car better, but it's like, again, Hamilton is just being thrown these wacky things, because Hamilton said, well, we had a good setup at the start of the weekend, we kept it, we qualified in a reasonably competitive position in terms of lap time from the Red Bull, even though they were only P7, right, Hamilton in qualifying, but he said, yeah, like, that was the setup we went for, committed to it, the car performed pretty well. But Toto says that in the race, they experimented with some things on his car, so it's like, Parc Ferme is a thing, so surely these experiments were already put into the car before the race, unless it was like a front wing change or some other small factors they tried. But yeah, they said that on Lewis, he had much worse deg because of the experiments on his front axle. It's like, can Mercedes conjure up an experiment that actually works? Or are all of their experiments just terrible? Like, are they winning again the data collection championship this year that they have for the last couple of years? Because that's all what they say, right? They do all this data collection, they do all these experiments. Doesn't seem to help, let's be real. So, yeah, that's what Toto says, that, yeah, once again, Lewis was experimenting. Is George experimenting with things? Like, is that how this works? Or is Lewis just the guinea pig again like he was back in 2022? I don't know. But that's how it seems from the outside looking in. And that's why he said, I'm going to let him pass, because it's testing, basically. That was extremely fair play. It wasn't like he was giving up a position for a podium. It was really just trying to understand why he wasn't fast at that stage. And that was clearly because we were doing something to the car which we wanted to try. So, I just don't understand what's going on at Mercedes. Mercedes anymore. They do need to come up with a replacement, of course. There's been lots of discussion around Kimi Antonelli, but they will take their time a little bit more. Other teams on the grid, Audi, as they will be with Sauber, and certainly Aston Martin, they will likely move rather quicker than Mercedes may, or certainly that Red Bull may. But as we've said before, if Red Bull and other teams feel like, well, if Aston are going to get Sainz, they might need to act slightly faster. Let's talk McLaren, because they've had a good start to the season, but I will say their Japan was rather underwhelming in the sense that Ferrari closed a gap of 0.6 from 6 months ago in Suzuka to the race last weekend's. The McLaren got slower with respect to the Red Bull Japan to Japan 6 months apart. This car is not especially good in a straight line, has poor DRS efficiency, has had some improvements and has kept competitive with the Red Bull in the high-speed corners, but still is lacking in some of the slower speed. And even McLaren say they're bringing their first upgrades to Miami this season, and obviously that's only one race after China, which is happening next weekend. They are not expecting it to do that much. They believe it'll make progress, but they don't think they're going to catch Ferrari, which is, quite the thing, because going into the season the feeling was, well, is it going to be Mercedes? Is it going to be McLaren? Is it going to be Ferrari posting the biggest challenge to Red Bull? Many thought that it was quite likely to be McLaren. Now they're saying, well, this one upgrade isn't really going to cut it. We're not going to get to McLaren or not going to get to Ferrari with this. We're going to need more. So it's like they're talking about not even catching Ferrari, yet alone catching Red Bull, right? So wonder what Norris especially thinks about this. Piastri, fine, second year in the sport, he'll grow and learn. But for Norris, it's more like, well, he made the call, and to some degree, to stay at McLaren rather than he could have joined Red Bull, we believe, alongside Max. They wanted him. He decided his best shot of a championship is to stay at a team, make it his own team, and maybe come 2026, that'll prove to be a very good decision. But for now, there's been a little bit of drama behind the scenes at McLaren, right? We saw David Sanchez, who was there, and then he was gone. And then, they fired him, basically, or he decided to depart because they couldn't find a role that suited him, and that technical structure doesn't necessarily seem to be firing on all cylinders. One structure, though, that seems to be is Ferrari. They have made the most progress of any team in the last 6 months, arguably in the last year. And even that seems to be true on the strategic side, right? Their strategies are actually working now. They pulled off a 2-stop with Sainz, a 1-stop with Leclerc. Can you believe it? But Sainz says, yeah, that's not our team being better necessarily operationally or strategically, although that must be part of it. He says the car's better, therefore it bails us out. Not bails us out, but this is the Mercedes effect, right? When their car was phenomenal, any strategy they tried looked good because they had Lewis Hamilton a set of medium tyres and a great car to bail them out of whatever they did. Ferrari and Sainz are now saying, well, we were making fine decisions last year and we're doing the same this year, but now the car is actually capable of executing what we are trying to target. But their car can get even better. The belief is, and this was said by many engineers, technical guys analysing the car and everything when it first came out and was revealed, that the car seems surprisingly basic to many. It was talked about by many technical analysts that it didn't seem like Ferrari had done much with their car during the winter period. But clearly they've done a rather good job with it under the bonnet, and they are considering it to be a 1.0 version of the car with major upgrades in the works. Important upgrades will arrive in Imola to build on this baseline. So a few things here that were mentioned in the Formula Uno article. The intention is, come Imola, to close as much of the gap as they possibly can. This weekend, Red Bull gained some performance in the race, certainly, with the upgrades to the RB20. But, to be honest, Red Bull were not that far ahead of Ferrari, all things considered. And the feeling is that come Imola, and certainly circuits that suit the Ferrari better, they could be in an interesting position, because are Red Bull closer to their performance ceiling than Ferrari are? You'd think probably yes, but I guess it depends. When Ferrari bring their upgrades, how much do they actually improve? So major upgrades in the works for Imola in a couple of races' time. Cutting the deficit is the plan in terms of overall aerodynamic efficiencies. That pretty much means straight line speed, how good the car is in a straight line, because it has been one element where the Ferrari of last year was actually really good. You guys probably remember, 2022, the Red Bull, especially with DRS, was a rocket ship. The Ferrari wasn't as much, and therefore Ferrari said, okay, if we want to win, we're probably going to need to ramp up the straight line speed for next year with the SF23. They did, and that last year's Ferrari was fast in a straight line, but that it paid for too many other sacrifices. So this year, they're once again back to a car which is more steady in a straight line, certainly compared to the Haas, for example, and it depends on wing levels and everything. The Red Bull isn't always the fastest car by a mile. This is Australia, for example, but Red Bull can maintain a very good top-end speed while still adding a fair bit of wing to the car to protect the tyres and give them other performance benefits. So pure straight line speed speed performance doesn't tell the entire picture of the aerodynamic efficiency of the car, but the feeling is that Ferrari want to improve in this aspect, and that is certainly part of their plan going forwards. It was also mentioned here that effectively the package that Adrian Newey and his engineers designs gave a tenth of a second to Red Bull. So the small upgrade they brought, which some were saying was actually a relatively major upgrade for Red Bull, certainly much more major than any other team brought to that Grand Prix, that was worth about a tenth. Now maybe there's a tenth of performance and then there's a tenth of extra performance that's yet to be unlocked once they understand the upgrade package. That's certainly happened before. But given that this was a reasonably sizable, to the floor and other changes we believe were made to the Red Bull, I think they brought like 3 or 4 new parts to the Japanese Grand Prix, maybe you might have expected, if they were very far away from the potential performance ceiling of the car, that to do more than a tenth of a second. But no, the feeling is that gave them an extra tenth, and that was enough to be 3.5 tenths of a second faster than the Ferrari on that Grand Prix, but a track that really suits the Red Bull and has done for the last couple of years. So these are all the parts of the Ferrari that are planned to change. Targeted work on traction and direction changes, because that's where some of their weaknesses lie, is on some of the higher speed stuff, but also in the rear limited circuits, right? Bahrain, certainly Bahrain, they really weren't especially competitive compared to Max in the hands of, I know Leclerc had brake issues, but Sainz wasn't particularly fast looking back at it. So in the traction zones, they do need to improve with respect to Red Bull and, aerodynamic efficiency. They want to increase the top end speed. They want to improve in a lot of areas. There are weaknesses to the car, but it is a very sound base to build on, Ferrari believe. And at this point, I actually trust Ferrari when they say this, whereas it's very difficult to trust Mercedes. So these are the elements they're looking to change. The sidepod inlets, the bellies of the car, so just like the underfloor, the floor, the wings, the diffuser, to try and make the swirling structure of the Ferrari SF23 even more effective. Improved downforce generated by the floor, an extra quality of load points. We've heard Mercedes talk about load points over the last few days that can lighten the downforce of the wings in certain circuits and consequently increase the efficiency of the single seater. So that would be the point, that if they can generate more downforce from the floor and other factors, then they can run less wing, therefore they can be faster in a straight line. So it all works together in tandem, this whole aerodynamic stuff. But yeah, sidepod inlets, sidepods, floor, wings and diffuser, those are the parts of the car they're changing. So there's a big upgrade in the works for Ferrari, and there's a few key things that they're working on. And if there's any team that can potentially catch Red Bull, Ferrari are going to give it their best bet this season. Next season, if this upgrade in Imola works, I genuinely have optimism that next year we might have a championship challenge, especially because there'll be Hamilton and Leclerc, which is, a very strong driver pairing. Not like Ferrari don't already have a very strong driver pairing, but, Hamilton is a 7-time world champion for a reason. And Carlos Sainz did actually say that he does believe that at some point this year, if not within a few races, they actually can be mixing it up with Red Bull properly for fighting for race victories this season. And even Helmut Marko says as well, Sainz is certainly a name that you cannot discount when it comes to making decisions on the driver lineup for next year. Christian Horner as well says that Checo Perez has priority for the seat, but they will take a few races before deciding. So it's going to be a good few weeks before they make a decision, Red Bull, apparently, whether they keep Perez or not. So he has to maintain this level of performance going forward if he wants a contract extension. But I imagine that they won't extend Perez for quite some time, and they only will make a signing if there's another driver that they feel like they would prefer in the car. Let's talk then about this whole Andretti stuff, because it's been a big talking point for a long time now. Andretti trying to enter the sport. They were flat out denied by Formula One, very controversially, a little while ago now. They're still absolutely committed, however, to coming into the sport in seemingly whatever way they possibly can. But they will have to have terms that appease them, as we'll see in a second with the whole Renault operation. There were rumours as well, because there have been some suggestions that potentially the second Red Bull team, now known as RB, AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso, could be sold. This makes more sense to me than maybe it has previously, just because RB is quite clearly a marketing entity. Like, it is absolutely kitted out with every sponsor under the sun. That is the entire intention of that team name. And, having Daniel Ricciardo there, the other factors in play that make that team fundamentally designed to generate revenues rather than necessarily to be that competitive. So if that's how Red Bull see it now, and sure, there are other advantages of having a junior team to bring up younger drivers such as Liam Lawson, but it's not really like RB are using it for that purpose right now with, Ricciardo in the seat, and maybe that won't be the case forever on recent rumours. I guess we'll see. That feels more plausible than it has done in a few years. for potentially that sister Red Bull team to be sold, especially when Zach Browner says we don't think this should be possible to own two teams anyway, and the rules need to change, as they may for 2026. But the more likely candidates to potentially fall into Andretti or another potential buyer's hands would be Alpine. They are a manufacturer team. They're not a customer team. The fact that they are dead last right now is embarrassing, and I mean, these numbers are ugly. Ocon has been overtaken 20 times this year, more than anybody else. Gasly has been overtaken 16 times, and I believe he is the only driver, Gasly, to have not overtaken anyone this season, which is pretty rough, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, that is the way that the Alpine is. And yes, they had some damage in Japan, and Ocon wasn't a million miles away from points in Australia, but it still wasn't great. The feeling is as well that Renault, you know, we've heard Otmar Schaffner say this for years, and many others involved in the Renault operation, that they are simply not equipped to try and pretend that they're going to execute this 100-race plan that they say they will. And it seems like the new people that are in charge over there are not necessarily so keen to keep pumping money into a project which is clearly not working. So it is plausible that Renault, again, pull the plug on the Alpine operation, which is Renault, but of course rebranded because, you know, they, I'm sure, sell loads of Alpine cars because of this, because I'm sure Alpine cars are really good. Which maybe they are, but I wouldn't know, watching their Formula One operation. So this is when the rumours are emerged about the possibility of an Alpine sale, especially to a team like Andretti. So according to information gathered in the Suzuka paddock, though, one of the conditions of a sale of the team. So first of all, Alpine say these are rumours, these are stories, these are not true about the sale. The team is categorically not for sale. But you know, when people say, definitely not for sale, guys, Mattia Binotto is definitely not getting fired. We are committed behind Mattia Binotto as Ferrari. We are committed behind, you know, Danny Kvyat, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon. They're definitely not going anywhere. If you're Red Bull, and then bang, of course, the decision is made at some point. So, you know, this is something that is often said by people that actually are potentially considering a sale. But they say that if you want to buy the team, there's a stipulation. You must use Renault power units. Because I think for Renault, it's like, maybe we don't run the team anymore. There's drama because they're based in France, but also in the UK, and the Enstone operation becomes quite challenging. But what they would potentially like to do is take the money from the sale, pump it into their power unit side, and continue being an engine supplier for the sport. So they would say, look, you've got to keep buying our engines until at least 2029, so that those that are actually working on the power unit from 26 and beyond, which I don't know if that's going to be any good based on their current engine, you know, at least they're still in a job, right? So Andretti might be the optimal buyer, and Andretti were willing, it seems, to take on Renault engines for some time. The thing is that General Motors are going to come in, we believe, in 2028 now as an engine supplier, or at least that is what they want to do, given the fact that their 2026 entry was rejected by Formula One. But Andretti are still absolutely committed to it, and potentially they could buy the Renault outfit and the Alpine outfit and take that over in effect, but Renault would want them to use those engines until 2029. So then their GM partnership could only potentially happen from 2030, which might not be what they want unless they can come to a better solution. Of course, the other intention is just try and come in as 11th team again, but Formula One have, you know, clearly put up barriers to making that happen. But Andretti are absolutely on the ball here, because, I mean, have a look at this. They've just today opened a new factory or new facility, let's say, in Silverstone. This is the full team, proud to announce the opening of a new facility at Silverstone Park. This is their building as we embark on the next stage of our preparations to enter the FIA Formula One World Championship. So, you know, how about this? 2 months ago, General Motors and Andretti were rejected by the sport, but and by the commercial rights holder, but they are still absolutely committed to making this work. And as Michael Andretti says, our work continues at pace. So, you know, I think they will consider all the alternatives. Sure, they ideally would want to enter as an 11th Formula One team onto the grid, but if that proves to be implausible, they may have some sort of outcome where RB, or most certainly Alpine, seem as rather attractive opportunities. And there's also this that was confirmed, when Andretti is not only coming into Formula One ideally, they are also going to make entries to Formula 2 and Formula 3, so supporting the junior categories, with part of the intention being to promote US talent to their Formula One team. So they are absolutely unequivocally committed to making this work in Formula One, you know, bringing in junior category cars and teams to make that transition work. It's actually a really exciting prospect for the sport. I really hope this happens. I just don't know in what form this may or may not happen over the coming years, given what Formula One management thinks about the whole shenanigans. But very much intrigued your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care of yourselves. And I'll see you next time. Thanks as well for 48,000 subs. Pretty sure we hit that yesterday. So that was absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I'll see you next time.